morsel, and thank you for tuning in to Fright Night Radio. We love to bring you stories of fright every Friday night. Stories that are creepy, suspenseful, and most of all, frightful.
You're about to hear He Kindly Stopped for Me. Written by Seth Chambers. Narrated by David A. Nickerson. For the last 23 years, a hand-carved sign has adorned the front door of my tavern, Gordon's Pub and Grill, a place where friends meet. You are welcome here. I've kept it there because I really mean it. Till you do something to piss me off, you're welcome here, and I don't care who you are. Doesn't matter the color of your skin, the slant of your political views, or what god or lack thereof you happen to worship. So long as you conduct yourself in a civilized manner, you'll be treated as family when you step foot in Gordon's Pub and Grill. That's why, when Death himself strode into my pub and took a seat in the dark corner by the dartboard, I marched right over, introduced myself, and took his order. Not that it was easy or anything. My heart pounded, rivers of sweat flowed down my face, and my voice shook like the proverbial reed in the wind. None of that mattered, though, because he was a welcome guest in my establishment. So, I could either treat him as such, or take down the sign and stop harping on my staff to treat everyone like friends. Can I bring you a beer? I asked. We have Lowenbrow, Miller Genuine Draft, and Moosehead on tap. Or perhaps you'd prefer something stronger, maybe a Jack and Coke or a Jim Beam. And yeah, I was babbling. For all I knew, this was a business call. The whole time I stood there jawing, I death-gripped my ever-present epinephrine injector. If death was there to take me away, I wasn't about to go without a fight. Wouldn't it be funny, I wondered, if death touched me, but then I jump-started my heart with a shot of adrenaline, cheating the old Reaper. Yeah, hilarious. Death smiled gently, and some of my anxiety melted. I ceased my babble, and Death said,
"Just a club soda, please. I'm still working."
It wasn't until I was behind the bar that it occurred to me that his comment about still working was meant as a joke. Apparently, the Reaper has a grim sense of humor. I returned with his club soda. The jukebox finished its last song, and the whole bar fell dead silent, so to speak. The song had been The End, an old Doors tune with Jim Morrison crooning, "This is the end." Then silence, as if the other guests in my pub were not only sitting quietly, but actually absorbing the sound. I set the club soda in front of Death. The place stayed quiet. Not everyone recognizes Death on sight, but most people sense something foreboding about the tall, good-looking man sporting an Armani three-piece. Death motioned for me to have a seat.
"Please join me, if you can spare a moment."
I had work to do, but who can say no to Death? I sat across from him, my heart thundering. Here and there, conversations began picking up again.
"Do you know who I am?"
I nodded. "You're I choked on the word, but then spat it out. "You are Death." He nodded and said,
"I'm looking for somebody."
My heart did a backflip and my sweaty hand grasped the auto-injector in my pocket. Death smiled in wry amusement.
"No, not what you think. Not right now. I'm just looking for somebody to talk to."
I see. My throat had dried up, so my voice came out as little more than a squeak.
"I like the sign out front,"
Death said.
"It has a good energy to it. You carved it yourself, didn't you?"
I nodded. A long time ago.
"A place place where friends meet.
He looked about, and I couldn't help but feel a tinge of pride. My pub is fairly large and yet retains a cozy feel. Big tables in the middle encourage groups to revel, while plenty of nooks, crannies, and corners allow for more intimate encounters. In one nook hunkers a dusty old piano. The floors, bar, and furniture are all well-worn oak. Artwork covers the walls, an eclectic mix that somehow works, ranging from impressionism to dogs playing poker. But give me credit, no velvet Elvis. A print of Van Gogh's Starry Night hung on the wall next to us, a red dart stuck in it. Souvenir of somebody's befuddled aim.
That's what I'm looking for,
Death said after a time.
to meet a friend. Problem is, I don't seem to have any.
Until that moment, I'd been looking everywhere except at him. The table, the floors, the dart stuck in Starry Night. Then I found myself looking right into Death's eyes. I gasped and tore my eyes away. In that brief glance, I beheld such depths of loneliness that my heart cries out even now. I tried to summon words, but choked up. Death didn't seem to notice anything amiss.
Say, Gordon, are you mad at me?
He asked. I blinked stupidly. It really is disconcerting to have Death address you by name. I shook my head. No, why would I be? He shrugged and sipped his club soda.
Just wondering. Thought you might be mad about Jack.
Death had an astounding memory. Jack was one of several dogs I'd had as a kid. I still hate the son of a bitch who swerved his F-150 to run over Jack, but I had no quarrel with Death for coming by later that night to put my dog, my buddy, out of his misery. Nope, I said, I'm not mad. Then we began to talk. He's not the sort you get to know all at once, but we established a connection and jawed for hours. I had Gwen bring Death one of our world-famous olive burgers and give me a couple MGDs. Death's been around a bit more than I have. He's visited every country, city, hamlet, and pissant burg in the world, whereas I stick pretty close to home. I think he had a lot bottled up inside and needed a listening ear, so after a while I sat back and just let Death rattle on. He reminisced and ranted. One minute he'd be listing the best places to go for barbecue, and the next he'd be off on a tirade about the insanity of the Crusades. Then, out of nowhere,
I really hate fire. It's a horrible way to go.
Death shuddered. I had questions about his work. He doesn't have a question or two for Death, but couldn't bring myself to ask. After musing about fire a bit, Death complimented the food and fell into silence, staring off at Starry Night. I quietly excused myself and slipped away to help Gary, my cook, clean up in the kitchen. We keep the grill open right up till closing time. Friends shouldn't have to drink on an empty stomach.
That guy you were talking with,
Said Gary, sharpening a knife.
is that who I think it is?
Yeah.
We get all kinds in here.
I stuck my head out of the kitchen. Death was still nursing that club soda and staring at Starry Night. Seemed strange that Death should linger. Was it a slow night for him? Or maybe he had helpers. I went back to helping Gary. When I stepped out again at closing time, Death was gone. A generous tip lay on the table. After closing for the night, I lay awake in my loft above the bar. I used to own a 3-bedroom home, but sold it after my ex pureed my heart into Cuisinart. Houses are for happy couples with 3.2 kids. Not that I'm bitter or anything, but all a bachelor needs is a pillow for his head, a pot to piss in, and a place for his dogs to run. My pub is tucked away from the beaten path, so there's plenty of room out back for Rex and Bear to charge about, while Scamper, who no longer scampers much, looks on. I've thought a long time there in my loft with Rex and Bear on their blankets and old Scamper curled at my feet. Death had paid me a visit. A of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world. Why, I wondered, why had he walked into mine? But wasn't it obvious? It was the sign out front. Old stories claimed that supernatural beings awaited an invitation before stepping over the threshold of somebody's home. Well, my place had a standing invitation right on the front door. As a result, I had befriended death. A curious thing, and probably quite an honor. Yet I'm human, fraught with human frailties, and soon my mind was playing with ways to take advantage of this friendship. A nasty thing to do, but then again, I had recently gotten a nasty little wake-up call. A couple of months before Death made his appearance, Gary had to rush me to the emergency room. I had just stepped behind the bar to fill some drink orders when my throat closed up, and suddenly I was struggling to draw air in through a pinhole. The ER staff pumped me full of adrenaline. My heart started pounding along like a charging rhino, but at least I was able to breathe. The medical staff chalked it up to unknown allergies. What the hell that was supposed to mean was anybody's guess. It didn't make any sense. My body simply turned against me, and I was never able to find out why.
Sometimes it just happens that way,
the attendant physician said. She prescribed me an epinephrine injector so that if it ever happened again, I could shoot myself full of adrenaline. Then, if my heart didn't explode, I might survive. My auto-injector became like American Express. I didn't leave home without it. Since that day, I started hearing this strange sound at my back. What could it be? Oh yeah, Time's winged chariot, hurrying near. So now, I wondered if it might be possible to cheat death, sidestep this little unknown allergy, and live forever. Millions must have already tried to pull one over on the old Reaper. Again, I thought about tales I'd heard about death. None of them ended with happily ever after. I felt ashamed, not for wanting to live forever, but with the idea of betraying a new friend. I mean, a lover will stab you in the back and rip out your heart in a hot second. That's expected. But a friend? Friends should treat each other better. That's what my pub was all about. A place where friends meet. That got me to thinking about what would happen to my pub after I died, and who I should will it to, and would the new owner modernize it and take down my sign? I never wanted my pub to change, and if I had to live forever to make sure of it, then so be it. Again, I found myself scheming. I told myself I wouldn't try to trick death, but would it hurt to simply ask him to erase my name from his appointment book? Oh hell, that seemed wrong too. He'd come to my pub to take a break from it all, not to be nagged. I almost wish he wouldn't show up again. But he did. The pub was fairly crowded, but the table near Starry Night was vacant, as if reserved. He took his seat. I brought him a club soda and a world-famous olive burger with fries. He motioned for me to join him. I sat and let him talk. He spoke of the castles in Scotland and how beautiful Ireland is, then somehow segged into the subject of bungee jumping.
I'm sorry, but if you jump off a tower tied to a rubber band, well, you might just as well have me on speed dial. But once again, I digress. You can tell me to shut up. I never let you get a word in edgewise.
Now, I wouldn't dream of telling Death to shut up. Would it be okay if I asked you a question?
You just did,
Death said with a quirky smile. Such a smart ass.
Say what's on your mind, Gordon.
I was just wondering. If somebody was dying, I mean now, right this instant.
Probably,
said Death. He took a bite of the olive burger.
Somebody always seems to be cashing out. Don't you read the news?
Then where do you come in? I mean, don't you go to them when... Death grinned, and there was just something in that smile that told me I was asking just the questions he wanted me to ask. That while I was planning to pull one over on him, he was pulling something over on me. But what? I could not guess.
I will be there for them. For every single one of them. There could be 100 people, 1,000 people dying right now. I'll be with all of them.
But you're here, now.
Yes?
He said. His smile grew wider, sepulchral even in my inflamed imagination.
I had to stop for a quick bite before getting back to work.
He polished off the last of the burger and fries. But...
My friend, you have an awfully narrow viewpoint. It's time we expand your horizons.
He stood, reached down, and took hold of my arm. Electrical energy surged through my body. I think I let out a girlish little scream. Was this a business call for death? Was it my time? He was taking me away. I tried to wrench free, but his grip was solid. I groped for my epinephrine injector.
Be still, it's not what you think.
He said, his voice like a summer breeze.
We're just going for a little trip, nothing more.
Trip? Trip where?
You asked some questions. I'm taking you to the answers.
Then he yanked me through a hole in the world that opens only for death. We emerged in his house, little more than a wooden framework squatting alone in a vast wheat field. Another bachelor dwelling. Yeah, I could relate. Is there a lady death? I couldn't help but ask.
She died.
It was night. Death said it was always night here. He cooked on a cast iron wood stove and carried water up from a stream. That's not very convenient, I remarked, pointing to the water bucket.
I'm in no hurry. Time doesn't matter here, nor space. Come, I'll show you.
We stepped outside and into the field. Pinpoints of light surrounded us.
Since the normal laws of time and space don't exist here, we can wind up in any time and any place. So, if you're expecting a guided tour, you're in for a surprise, because I never know what to expect myself.
I tried to tell him that he'd already answered my questions just fine, that I didn't need a tour. Death only chuckled, grabbed hold of my arm, and half dragged me to a point of light. We kept walking into the light.
Hang on.
We stepped into a burned, ravaged town exploding with guerrilla warfare. Infantry soldiers in full body armor fired weapons that emitted devastating pulses of plasma energy. But I was in the midst of it in the flesh. It'd be one thing if death had brought me along in non-corporeal form, but I was actually there. I guess he wanted me to get the full effect, which I did. I ran, dove, and scrambled for cover. I shook with the impact pressure of nearby plasma charges. My nostrils sucked in the stench of sulfur, sweat, fear, and blood. Artillery rounds plummeted in a lethal hail all around me. Nobody seemed to notice me. Maybe I was invisible to everyone, but I could still bite the big one in the crossfire. Soldiers charged, shouted orders, cursed and prayed and screamed and cried. An infantryman was hit. He wailed and thrashed as body armor melted into flesh. I looked about for death. I wasn't the only one searching for him. One infantryman, mangled and burned almost to a crisp, reached out for death, screaming, "Come back here, you bloody bastard, you!" Death strode back across the devastated landscape and beckoned me to follow. I scrambled after him, and we returned to the field where it was always night. The fuck were you thinking? I could have been killed.
What? You want to live forever?
Death flashed that quirky, maddening smile of his and pushed me through another light. We emerged into the bedroom of a young girl. She must have been 8 or 9, sitting wide awake in bed holding a Winnie the Pooh. My heart was still jackhammering from the mad dash through a war zone mere moments before. I stayed as still and quiet as I could while trying to figure out why the hell we were there. The girl was telling Pooh Bear a story. Once upon a time there lived a terrible dragon, but he wasn't really terrible, just terribly misunderstood. But everyone thought he was terrible because he was so big and he breathed fire. But he couldn't help but breathe fire, and sometimes he set things on fire without meaning to. Then one day,
"Go on, Cindy,"
said Death, kneeling by her side. I recognized the fear that flashed across Cindy's face. When I first met Death the day before, I could barely speak. But Cindy was braver than me and went on with her tale in a strong voice. One day, the king's army came to slay the dragon. The dragon started to cry. And when the army general asked him why he was crying, the dragon said, "Because you want to kill me." The general felt really bad, so he left the dragon alone and led his army back to the castle and took all the soldiers out for ice cream. After that, the dragon lived a long, long time. But when he was very old, Death came to visit him, and the dragon was afraid.
"Why was he afraid?"
Death asked. Cindy rolled her eyes. "Because he was a big baby." Death smiled at her.
"Are you afraid of me?"
"No, of course not. Did you come to hear my story?"
"No, sweetheart, I'm afraid not. But it was a wonderful tale nonetheless."
"Well, duh."
"It's time to go now, Cindy."
"But I'm not even sick."
"I'm sorry. Sometimes it just happens that way."
I thought back to my little ER trip. The attending physician had told me the same thing concerning my unknown allergic reaction. Sometimes it just happens that way. "Wait, cried Cindy. "Listen, I'll tell you another story, and if you like it, you let me stay."
"Sorry, Scheherazade, no can do."
Now Cindy was shaken and had Pooh in a stranglehold, and yet when Death reached for her, she set Pooh on the bed and, crying, took his hand. I stood there wishing I were back on the battlefield or anywhere else. Where am I going?
"Home, sweetheart. You're going home."
Can I take Pooh? Death shook his head no.
"Good night,"
he whispered, and her head fell back on the pillow. I followed Death back to the field. My gut convulsed and spewed my supper on the ground. Still bent over, I informed Death that I had plenty of adventure for one night, thank you very much.
"Oh, but we're just getting started."
"Why'd you have to take her?" I screamed. "She was just a little girl. What the hell is wrong with you? She was fine."
"I don't decide who lives and who dies."
"But you're Death, damn it! If you don't decide, who the fuck does?"
"I don't know,"
he said with a shrug.
"Wipe your face. You've got some puke on your mouth."
"You don't know? You don't know who decides?"
"Sorry. Never met my boss. At least, not face to face."
Death seemed to be having a good time. Scratch that. He seemed downright gleeful.
"Ready, set, go."
This time we stepped onto the shoulder of a freeway at midday. After my eyes adjusted to the light, I beheld an absolutely horrendous traffic mishap. One of those nasty chain reaction pileups that seem to go on forever. Death set about his work, never hurrying but also never pausing. Those scenarios went on for an eternity. Death walked among the world of mortals like a tourist strolling through Bali. He whispered to an unfortunate young man who had overdosed on heroin.
I'm sorry, friend. You made a mistake.
He visited a bedridden old woman who said,
Well, just where the hell have you been, stranger?
She kissed Death's cheek and slipped away with a smile. I watched as Death stood on a street corner and placed his hand on a young man's left shoulder. The man looked more puzzled than frightened as he dropped. On another street, Death delivered a woman from the horror of a knife attack. He made himself invisible to her attacker, but spit on the man as he split the scene with purse in hand. Death walked by a bedroom window, and as his shadow passed, a woman cried out. I stood outside on a crisp winter's evening while Death marched through the flames of a burning house to rescue a family of 3, mother, father, young boy.
Fire bothers me,
he said after that, and we finally called it a night. After taking the journey to the field of night and going with Death on his rounds where sometimes it was day, sometimes night, sometimes the present and sometimes the future, after all this, something in my life perspective changed. A couple of my waitresses showed up late, but I couldn't be concerned with such trivial matters. I spent the next evening experimenting with recipes and getting in Gary's way. Gary grumbled and did his best to work around me. At 9 o'clock mortal time, Gwen stepped into the kitchen.
Your, friend is here.
I brought Death out a plate of jalapeno poppers I had just fried.
These are wonderful,
he said.
It's always good to have a meal before a long night's work, don't you think? You will be joining me again, won't you?
My stomach nodded at the mere thought of another night's journey. The things I'd seen, the pain, the fear, and all of it so up close and personal. No, I didn't ask for you to drag me along the last time. All I did was ask a simple question, and you... I ran out of words. I was mad and scared both. I told him to enjoy the poppers and headed back for the kitchen.
Please wait,
said Death. I stopped.
The night gets lonely,
he said.
You have no idea at all. The few things I showed you, that was nothing.
I'm sorry, I said, turning back toward him. I'm just not up to it. What do you want from me?
I just want a friend,
said Death. I looked away. Death stared at starry night for a long time and closed his eyes for an even longer time. I was vaguely aware of my waitresses passing by, giving us as much space as possible. I noticed a lot of eyes on us. Mostly, though, I was aware of Death. He tensed, and I knew he was seeing thousands upon thousands of deaths. They say Death never sleeps. That may be true, but I'm sure he dreams.
I know what you want, Gordon McKenna,
Death finally said in a voice as soft and cool as falling snow.
You want to keep right on as you are, hiding away from the world in your comfy little pub, living your comfy little life, never moving on, just marking time while the whole world marches into oblivion. Go ahead, tell me I'm wrong.
I looked away and said nothing.
You want immortality right here on good old terra firma. And what's more, you think it's just a matter of tricking me.
I never said that.
No, you didn't. But you believe it. You think I pick and choose who lives and who dies and when. Well, it isn't like that. I'm not the problem. It's disease and old age and accident that take their toll. It's the fact that this old earth can only hold so many people at a time, so everybody needs to get out of the way for somebody else.
What about Cindy? She wasn't old. She wasn't diseased. She was just a little girl, for fuck's sake. Why'd she have to get out of the way?
It's like this. Things fall apart. The human body is made up of thousands of little vessels and moving parts, organs and chemicals, all in a delicate balance. The center cannot hold. Unknown allergies pop up out of nowhere, don't they, Gordon?
I stared at him, clenching my auto-injector so hard my hand hurt.
But when something goes wrong, it just goes wrong. Sometimes it just happens that way. I don't make it go wrong. I'm just the guy who comes along afterward to do the paperwork.
You make yourself sound like a civil servant.
What else would I be, in the grand scheme of things?
Now everybody in the place was looking our way. In an odd sort of way, Death is a celebrity, not that he's often approached for autographs. Why are you telling me this? I demanded, looking hard at him right now. Yeah, sure, I'd like to live forever. Fine, I admit it. But I never asked you for that. I laid awake thinking about it. I damn sure wanted to, but I didn't, did I? Now it was Death's turn to look away.
No, you didn't. You've been nothing but a friend, and I appreciate that. More than you know, Gordon. It seems everyone asks something of me or tries to trick me. Even my beloved godson. But not you. That's why I have something to tell you. I do have a certain degree of influence with the powers that be. You want to go on forever, tending this pub, making strangers feel like family? I can arrange it. It might not be as cheery as you'd expect, but it can be done. In exchange, I ask one thing. Your company for another long day's journey into night.
Forever, I thought, looking around my place and imagining greeting new friends until the crack of doom. I'd become a legend. Never would I replace the scarred wooden tables with anything shiny or modern. Never would my pub lose its charm, and never would my sign come down from the front door. Then I thought of Cindy taking Death's hand, and the old lady kissing his cheek, and the hundreds of other people Death had taken while I stood witness. No deal, I told Death. These people who had faced death with courage, with trembling, with rage, those people I wanted to see again and maybe get to know on some level of existence. They all faced death. So would I. Death nodded solemnly. Eat up, I said. We have a long night ahead of us.
But you just said, didn't you?
It was funny to see Death at a loss for words. I'm going with you on another night's journey, I told him, but just for the sake of friendship, nothing more. You can give the immortality deal to someone else. Death's been busy since then. He visited Scamper last summer, running long fingers through his fur and telling him what a good pooch he'd been. He came to my mother in the hospital long after visiting hours. She was asleep and only Death could wake her.
Never be lonely again,
he whispered. He visited a friend of mine who had wrapped a length of rope around his neck. At some point, Death will step out of the night to pay me a final visit. A business call. But I can't tell you that story. Not yet. I find myself hoping that someday Death will finish reaping everybody, step back in time and drop by my pub for another visit.
I'm finally done working,
I imagine him saying with a massive sigh.
Now how about a stiff drink?
Thank you for tuning in to tonight's episode of Fright Night Radio. If you enjoyed our story, please give us a thumbs up. And be sure sure to subscribe to our channel so you enjoy a frightful new tale every Friday night. Pleasant dreams.